6:36, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 89.7 WTN. Welcome on into Nashville's Morning News. Monday, March 3rd. Hope you're doing well. Jonathan Fahey joining us on the Newsmaker Hotline. Jonathan, always great to talk with you. And of course, there's a lot of different topics that we're going to cover in this segment. But obviously, the number one topic on everybody's mind this morning is the complete meltdown with Vladimir Zelensky, Donald Trump, and J.D. Vance. And I spent a good part of the first segment, the first hour, actually, Jonathan, talking about who ambushed who. Because you have a lot of folks in the media, Trump haters, and they're actually trying to say that Vance and Trump ambushed Zelensky. But it seems to me that Zelensky, he ambushed Trump and Vance because he was like poking the bear during the first 30 minutes or so of that press conference. I played all kinds of audio to back up that sentiment. But, I mean, did you see the same thing? That Zelensky came in there after a meeting with Democrats where they told him, don't sign the mineral deal. And so Zelensky comes out, arms folded, all ticked off, copying an attitude. And it just seemed like he was poking the bear that was Donald Trump and J.D. Vance.
That's exactly what it was. And you know, when you look at the overall picture, I don't see how you could really say it was otherwise. They had a whole lunch planned, a ceremony to sign the agreement and all of these things. So this idea that if it was a Trump-Vance ambush, it would be quite an elaborate, plan to do so. So the Zelensky thing, he came in there, he couldn't be quiet, he wasn't respectful, and I think he's so used to people fawning all over him and treating him like he's the greatest thing ever that he just thought he can, say whatever he wanted. And probably he doesn't want to sign the mineral deal. He probably just wants unlimited money from us, and we're never supposed to expect anything in return, which is the amazing thing about it. And Donald Trump's, I think, done with that style of American foreign policy, which is we're just this giant piggy bank for the world, whether or not it's even in our national interest.
One of the things, and Zelensky is out there today, the headlines are that he is ready to sign this mineral deal now, which I find interesting because he spent the entire weekend, he jets off to Europe and he's talking to Macron and he's talking about talking to the UK Prime Minister as well. And they're embracing the whole thing. And then Zelensky comes out after all of that. Zelensky comes out and says he's ready to sign that mineral deal. I think that's kind of interesting because you have Europe now and the leaders in Europe, they're saying that they're going to step up not only the financial aspect of supporting Ukraine, but also you've got the UK Prime Minister now saying that they're apparently willing to put boots on the ground.
Yeah, I think that was kind of interesting, but I do wonder when you look at sort of the public versus the private messaging, you wonder if they were like, we're going to publicly say we're supporting you and that will help you in the short term, but you better sign this deal because you need the United States and we can't do it alone. So I wonder if there was some of that sort of mixed messaging because I don't know if you saw it was, I think the British ambassador or somebody was on one of these shows this weekend saying basically Zelensky should, sign the deal. So I am interested in it. I don't think Europe wants to not only go it alone, so to speak, but they are not going to foot the bill. And I think everyone knows that. They'll throw a $3 billion loan his way and things like that. But I would be highly surprised if they aren't saying privately, we need the United States. And the boots on the ground thing, you do wonder, is that reality? But that seems to be only after there is a peace and they would go as peacekeepers types of things. But the whole thing is quite, it's fascinating to watch it unfold.
Yeah, this is what the UK Prime Minister said.
The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting. But to support peace in our continent and to succeed, this effort must have strong U.S. backing.
It's interesting because Trump has been saying all along, just putting aside the part of the strong U.S. backing, but when Zelensky was flying off to the UK and so forth and speaking to all of these foreign leaders, thing I just kept thinking about was, okay, well, then you pay for it, Europe. I mean, that's the bottom line, and that's part of what Donald Trump has been saying as well. And I think that at this point, one of the questions that I would ask is there a way forward between Trump and Zelensky based on the fact that you and I both agree that Zelensky was the one that ambushed J.D. Vance and Donald Trump?
I think there is, and I think Donald Trump is very transactional. I think it offended him, but I think he'll get over it because I think he looks at the greater good, one, to get a deal on this thing, but also he knows it's in our national security interest to some respects, and certainly the world's national security interest to end this thing. And it's funny when I, just thinking about all the Democrats, criticizing Trump and, he's a stooge for Putin and all this stuff. And it's like, well, what's the other option? I've never heard the other option that will make this better. Is it lots of people die and we spend a bunch of money and we end up in the same place in 3 or 4 years? Is it lots of people die, we spend a lot of money and Russia takes over? Or is it lots of people die, we spend a lot of money and somehow Ukraine wins, which seems to be the least likely scenario? And the bonus option is obviously World War III. So I'd love to hear the Democrats when they're just complaining about Trump is like, well, what's the way that this ends better than Trump's solution? Maybe there is in fact a better idea, but they should be putting it out there rather than just sort of this, the standard name calling, which just seems like all they can do.
I think part of what, and I talked about this a little bit in the 5 o'clock hour, but there's all this opposition, and you just touched on it. There's all this opposition against Trump and Vance and, trying to work out a deal with Vladimir Putin. And I'm just wondering, because it seems to be common sense that you want a war with a lot of carnage and is costing a lot of money, costing a lot of lives, of course. You want to try to end that war. And it just seems like common sense. Is a lot of the opposition based on Trump derangement syndrome?
Yeah, it has to be. And, the funny thing is, we've talked about, I'm sure you talked about this, he's trying to mediate this thing. The Democrats would rather beat their chest and get a bad resolution than to maybe dial back the rhetoric and get a good resolution. Because Donald Trump, if he's bringing them to the table, he can't just be trashing Putin and everything else. If he's somewhat respectful to Putin, he'll end up getting more for Ukraine, which everyone seems to miss the point. And anyone that's been involved in a mediation, that's what people do. The mediator will tell the one side, oh, you've got some issues, you may want to come a little bit this way. And then they say that to the other side. So I find this just remarkable that people seem to be missing the point. And maybe Donald Trump won't succeed here, but at least he's trying something that's better than the current situation and would also benefit the American public with the mineral deal, which will also ultimately benefit Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll get into this a little bit more during the after the traffic, but you're right, because this mineral deal, and I've talked about this mineral deal a lot. It's a deal to help Ukraine, partner with Ukraine, mine their minerals, mine their resources. That could bring billions of dollars to America. It would also bring billions of dollars, of course, to Ukraine in this partnership. And it seems to me like if we are partnered with Ukraine from a financial standpoint, well, then ultimately that does provide them a sense of security, because if we're getting a lot of money or a lot of minerals from Ukraine in this partnership, then that in and of itself serves as it would seem to me, a willingness to protect Ukraine and our investments from Russia. But we'll talk about that straight ahead. 6:45. There's something really weird going on within the Republican Party in Williamson County that we're going to talk about again right before the news coming up here on WTN. So Jonathan Fahey joining us, talking about a deal with Ukraine, a mineral deal. If we are engaged in this partnership where we are helping Ukraine get their minerals and we're getting money for it and so forth, well, does that in and of itself provide some sort of a guarantee of protection for Ukraine? Because ultimately what America would be doing is protecting our investment in Ukraine.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like you want to have if you're Ukraine, you want to have our interest as close to alignment with their interest as possible. So if we're going to invest a lot of money and everything else, and these minerals are vital to our economy, we're going to protect them. And Putin knows that too. And he's not, after seeing, Trump this weekend, everyone, the Democrats are missing the point. I think Putin actually sees Trump as strong because nobody has actually stood up to Zelensky for the last 4 years. Everyone has fawned all over him when he's like sort of the Dr. Fauci of world leaders, just prancing around, hanging out with celebrities, and seemingly has plenty of time on his hands, which is just the astonishing thing about it. And everyone has just fawned all over him. Nobody dares question where the money goes or anything else. They just act like he's the greatest thing ever. And Donald Trump finally just said, hey, enough. This is ending. Like it or not, we need to end this thing, and it's better for your people. And if you're Ukrainian mom or dad with a son that, granted you don't get, drafted until 25 in Ukraine, but it's like you don't want your kids to die, your parents to die over this if it's not going to get any better.
One of the things, and then we're going to move on, but one of the things that I would ask is, do you see any path where we will continue to fund Ukraine moving forward, or is that ship just completely sailed at this point?
I would think there is no scenario. The only scenario would be funding that accompanied a peace deal, meaning like, hey, we have a peace deal and they need funding for this or that, at least on the short term. But I even think that may be a stretch. But if they don't work something out, I know there's no one that could see Donald Trump going to Congress asking for more money on this, or the Republicans voting for it. That just seems very far-fetched. So they probably realize, hey, they've got a lot of money from us, but they've got to do it on their own or with Europe's help, and maybe Europe will step up in a big way, but I don't think anyone realistically thinks that. They might, they're paying lip service over the weekend, but when it's time to write checks, they're not going to be there with as great of a level of enthusiasm.
All right, real quickly, this is going to be really interesting. Later on this week on Wednesday, sanctuary city mayors are going to be testifying in front of Congress. How much of a train wreck is that going to be?
It's complete train wreck. I don't think these sanctuary cities mayors fully realize the vulnerability they have, because the questions are going to be, what was the purpose of these sanctuary cities? Was it to keep illegal aliens in your community? Because if that's the case, that's a federal violation of the harboring statute. And these sanctuary cities mayors have been getting away with it so long and have a righteousness to them. It's going to be a train wreck. It will bring this to the full attention of the American people, hopefully more so than it has been. And, most of them are going to change their ways. Some of them are going to, it may be Boston, maybe Chicago, are going to end up, I think, maybe fighting this, but fighting it and losing it.
All right, 6:50 Nashville's Morning News. Jonathan, always great to have you on. How can people find you on X?
John for Fairfax, JONFOR, Fairfax, FAIRFAX.
All right, John for Fairfax at Twitter, X. Thank you as always for joining us. Jonathan Fahey here on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Dan Mandis here. All right, coming up before the news, I'm going to touch on a bizarre story out of Williamson County. The Republican Party in Williamson County is engaged in a bit of a battle. And I find this really interesting, especially considering that one of the sides is refusing to talk about something that they're being accused of wanting to plot. We'll talk about that straight ahead.